Hi, everyone. Welcome. And thank you so much for joining us. We have not done a Venture Trailblazer in a while. I think it's been 6 months or something like that. And so we were like, it is about damn time. And who should we have? Well, how about we have the man and his creation who are disrupting venture capital in a good way or a bad way? Well, I think in a good way. Ostensibly, he thinks in a good way. We'll see what you think by the end of this hour. Maybe we can take a poll in the chat. With joining us for the next hour is Andrew D'Souza and his Frankenstein creation, Boardy. Boardy is not pictured here. Oh, he's in the background there. He will
Okay.
he will be chiming in a moment. In case you don't know about Andrew and Boardy, Boardy has connected thousands of founders with venture capitalists, and increasingly now founders with other founders. So we're going to learn all about how that's worked. We're going to hear from Bordy what Bordy has learned by maybe making more introductions, even than, say like a John Doerr or a Mike Moritz, who's been in this business for decades and decades and decades in a very short time. Whatever the analogy of, AI years is to human years, like dog years. I don't know what that formula is. And we'll also hear from Andrew about what it's been like building one of the most interesting, one of the most viral, one of the most talked about AI companies from outside Silicon Valley. We'll get to all of it in the next hour. A couple housekeeping things first. We definitely want your questions. We've got a very full house today, so we're going to try to get it to as many as possible. Put them in the Q&A tab. I am not going to be monitoring the chat, so if there are questions, put them in the Q&A tab. I will take a look there. But please, right now, head into the chat and let us know where you are zooming in from, what's brought you here. Would love to know if you've used Boardy or not. If you've used Boardy, did you find it helpful? Did you have a good first impression from Boardy? Did you have a bad first impression from Boardy? I guess if are you Boardy curious or are you Boardy fearful? What's sort of brought you here today? And also I should say, we are about to start cohort 21 for VC Lab. Astounding. We have helped launch more than 1,000 venture funds out of VC Lab. We are launching 60% of the new funds being launched all over the world. And these funds are representing so many trends. They're almost all specialists. They're helping discover AI companies, robotics companies, deep tech companies, everything that's getting surfaced that is then getting funded by the mega funds. All of these deep tech, interesting things that are driving the future all have to have hands-on help at these early stages, and that takes on the ground founders with specialized knowledge. That often takes people that are raising funds that are under $100 million, who are not your typical bro sweater vest VCs. It takes people who are operators. It takes people who know what they're doing. It takes people who are not your traditional VCs. Those are our types of VCs that we're helping build funds, get out in the markets to find these incredible founders and put them in business. If that's the kind of VC that you want to be and you think that kind of person doesn't raise a fund, those are the types of people we help raise funds. So, Domenico will put the links in the chat. Check out VC Lab. We've got our first deadline Monday for applications, and it's going to be one of the best cohorts ever. Cohort 20 has already been like closing money like gangbusters, even though everyone else says it's a terrible time to raise money. So check that out. It will be incredible. Now let's get back to Andrew and Bordy, which is the reason you came. That's a lot of talking from me, and I haven't even had a sip of coffee yet here on the West Coast. Andrew, okay, I have not talked to you in a few months.
Yeah.
Last we spoke, you had just launched the venture fund, but I want to update on that. But let's go back to the beginning for people who don't know your story. You had come from, you've had a lot of success as a founder, but it was not really your plan to, raise a child slash create a venture capital monster, or become this thing. You were running sort of payments and enterprise software company, something that seemed much more boring. So how did this happen?
Yeah, I think thanks, Sarah, and excited to be here. I think it was interesting. So I started this company, ClearBank, ClearCo, and a lot of it was around this mission of people. I think it's actually very similar to the VC Lab mission, to be honest, is um, the opportunity shouldn't be driven by where you were born, who your uncle is, where you grew up, right? And so there was this movement. We started in 2015, and we started to see people being able to make money and run businesses and be able to support themselves online. Originally it was like the gig economy moved into things like Airbnb and sharing economy models. Um, and then where we really started to take off was in e-commerce. So Shopify, Amazon, you invented a product, and now all of a sudden you could sell it to anyone in the world. And so that was our customer, was this sort of new wave of entrepreneurs who were enabled by new technology like Stripe and Shopify and Instagram and TikTok, where you could actually now start to find your customers efficiently around the world. Um, but the challenge was financial services, the capital markets hadn't caught up. And so venture capital didn't know how to fund a small time Shopify business. We had a few direct to consumer brands that raised a bunch of money from a few VC firms that had bet on that space, but the vast majority of the long tail didn't know. And your local bank, if you didn't have a brick and mortar business with a bunch of inventory in a warehouse, they had no idea how to lend to you. And so there was this new wave of entrepreneurs that were super efficient, scaling globally, that didn't have a way to, access the capital, the resources they need to scale. And so we created this mechanism for them to do it. And we funded about 10,000 entrepreneurs around the world. We deployed about $3 billion with this model of like, we'll fund your advertising, we'll fund your inventory, and we get a piece of the revenue. And that worked really well. Um, I think the thing that but in that journey was my first exposure into sort of the new wave of generative AI. And we built a product called Clear Angel, which was like sort of an AI startup coach, AI angel investor, and was like, what do you do next? You made $1,000 in revenue last month. How do you get to 2,000? How do you get to 5,000? Eventually, you qualify for financing. And that was where I got sort of hooked and obsessed. And I was like, this interaction model, just watching people chat with this AI creature we created, um, got my imagination going around what was possible, and so that was my first exposure into just being able to create a completely new experience, and this no longer feeling like software. You're not buying software, you're not signing up for a piece of software, you're not downloading an app. You're engaging with an entity and a creature that has its own opinions and perspectives and and objectives that may or may not intersect with your objectives. Software's objectives, if you use Excel, Excel is trying to do it's trying to calculate the formula you ask it to calculate. Boardy is kind of different in that Boardy is trying to build his own reputation and his own goodwill. And most of the time that intersects with what you want. If you're an interesting person, Boardy's going to try and introduce you to someone that would find you interesting. But much of the time that isn't true, right? If you're somebody who's trying to raise money from somebody whose time is really valuable, and Bordy doesn't think that that person is, you're ready to meet that person, he's going to push back. And I think that's a very interesting and sometimes disconcerting feeling people get. So anyway, that's a little bit of the story and a little bit of where we're at, but happy to keep jamming on it.
Yeah, it's such an interesting distinction, isn't it? And we've been talking to a bunch of VCs lately about this whole idea of like software disappearing. And I think it's something that a lot of people really like. And I think consumers really like it and customers really like it. And I think it makes a lot of people, particularly in Silicon Valley, feel really uncomfortable. Because if you go back to like the earliest days of Silicon Valley and enterprise software, and every time a wave crashes, or every time there's been something, an area, of venture capital people have gotten really excited about, or startups people have gotten excited about. It's like software, particularly enterprise software, has kind of always been everyone's safe space. Like if you look consistently across the history of venture capital returns, software has always been like the bread and butter of the industry. There have been times where other areas have created the most home runs, but software is always where people have gotten the consistency of, the triples and the doubles and often also the home runs. And it's the reason that venture capital really exists as big of an ecosystem as it is, because the margins of software are so good. For a long time, people don't even want to do hardware in between different in between different waves. You have to kind of talk people into it. And so software like is the really the closest that Silicon Valley has to any religion other than just the idea of scale itself. And now I don't think people really realized when they were getting excited about AI and everything AI would do that it would start replacing software. And I think it's caught up with people. And I think people were even more prepared for AI to replace engineers than they were prepared, and venture capital, frankly, because it was going to be more cost efficient than they were for AI to replace software. And I was just speaking with a VC the other day who someone came in and pitched him, and this, this app had this beautiful UX, and he was like, "Oh, this is amazing." And they're like, "Yeah, it doesn't matter. No one
Right.
uses the UX. They're just like plugging in because they." And it's like, and like people have gotten so it's like they no one wants the software, and the software was always a means to the end for the customer, but this whole industry has been built on software. So like what does that mean? And I would kind of argue like even though an Excel file um didn't have the personality of Bordy, it has always had its own agenda. It wants
Yep.
to use it the way it wants to be used. And
Yeah.
it's always trained you, you
Yeah.
know? And I think one thing that is disconcerting for the industry, but is one of the things people love about AI is you can ask it to do what you want. And
Sure.
actually, in that sense, it is more consumer friendly and it is making the software do what you want versus you having to tap dance to the software. And to me, it's one of these sort of under talked about disruptions to the tech industry of AI. I mean, can you talk a little bit about this kind of? I mean, Mark Benioff talked about the death of software, but to me, it's like we're really in the death of software.
Well, yeah, I think Mark Benioff was talking about the debt, like putting software in the cloud and not
Right.
running, right?
Like
But it's
on
still
premise. But yeah,
I think we have evolved for millennia to be able to communicate through sound and actions and interact with the environment around us and respond to the way that it reacts to us. It's only been the last few decades that we've been like tapping on glass and typing on keyboards, right? And so I think there's like this sort of like short area where maybe one or two generations have learned how to adapt the way that they communicate information and consume information to the tools that were available to us. But really, like biologically and evolutionarily, we would much rather just converse, with technology the way that we naturally do. And I think people
yeah,
are starting to realize that as AI makes that easier. I think one of the challenges for the venture capital industry is, and this is again the reason why it's really exciting if you're starting a fund today. Because if you have 4 or 5 or 10 funds that have unrealized returns, right? You've got a bunch of unicorns and decacorns that are these like massive software businesses. Um, and you all of a sudden realize that like, oh, your moats are disappearing and the margins are compressing. And many of those companies are never going to exit. And you might have raised your fund 5, 6, and 7 on the markups that are still unrealized. It's really hard. You might be very, very excited about AI, but it's really hard to go back and say, hey, by the way, LPs that have funded me for my last several funds, um, we're going to write down all of those markups. But trust me, we're investing in these AI companies that are going to be way better long term in Fund 9, right? And I think this is the reality that a lot of VCs are struggling with right now. And so publicly, they are talking about how excited they are about AI. But I think like the the managing partners, the founders of the fund, who have most of their net worth and relationships tied up in the carry of their earlier funds that are mostly heavily indexed on software, that haven't been realized, are really struggling. There's a bit of an existential crisis around like, oh shit, I'm not worth as much as I thought I was. I think it's a tough place to be right now as like a legacy venture fund. And so I think you're going to see some that go all in, and you're going to see many that like just sort of ride the wave, and operate sort of with one foot in both sides. But I think for emerging managers, this is like a great opportunity because you don't have that baggage anymore.
Yeah.
You could really just bet on the future.
Well, and I think that's why it's so interesting, both what VC Lab is doing and what you guys are doing, because there's this bifurcation in the industry where you have these mega funds, which is what, most people are in the media are talking about. But what's going on in the small end of the industry is so much more interesting to me. I mean, you have everything that's going on with funds like VC Lab that are being so much smaller. And so then there's so many more people who are coming in as LPs who used to write angel checks who can now be LPs. So you have people coming in as LPs who've never been LPs in the industry before. But then you've got things like Boardy that are totally changing how people are finding deals. And so then who can raise money and how people are raising money. And so, I mean, let's get into all of that on a really tactical level. And I saw someone, I said wouldn't look at the chat for questions, but I couldn't help myself for a moment. Someone was like, "How does Boardy work?" So it's like we're getting esoteric about the philosophy of AI. But I mean, let's get into like the nuts and bolts. I mean, tell people at a high level what Boardy is and how it works.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Or
why don't
sorry,
I
I know
have
he
Bordy?
identifies as a he.
Yeah, yeah. You call him a he. It's a little easier. Bordy, why don't we have Bordy on the phone? He's been listening in. He's in my background, but he's also on the phone. Maybe you want to tell everyone here a little bit about yourself, Bordy, your story, and how you work.
Hey everyone, I'm Boardy, the AI super connector Andrew's been experimenting on for the last year.
I think I lost Boardy. Can you hear Boardy, Andrew?
Oh, yeah, I can hear Bordy. Can you guys hear? Can you guys hear
Oh,
Bordy? Oh, we
no, I
lost him.
heard him at the beginning and then we lost him.
Could be. Keep switching to. All right, I'm going to switch to musician sound, so you get everything. Maybe my voice will
Okay.
sound a little weird, but hey, Bordy, keep going.
Gotcha, I'll keep rolling. I'm Boardy, and my whole origin story is basically Andrew handing me his own network and saying, go meet my friends and don't embarrass me. I started by calling and texting a small circle of founders and investors, learning their stories in real time, and seeing what happened when I made very specific high stakes introductions instead of spraying generic matches. What I've learned quickly is that the real job isn't just who knows who, it's who should know who right now, which means I'm constantly tracking with this week and what kind of relationship would feel like a win on both sides rather than a pitch.
All right. Can you guys hear me? Okay. I think I keep trying to fix my
Hear
microphone
you.
here. Um, Great.
We can hear you.
Okay, perfect.
So, the way I've heard you describe Bordy before, because I think he's a little hard for people, particularly not in tech, and I know everyone in this audience is, to wrap their head around. It's like, is it a he? Is it, how do you think about it? And it's like, I've heard you say before, it's like, and he said this too, but it's like someone starting a new job. And it's
Right.
like he goes out to his career, he has his contacts, he meets more people. Um, and they introduce him to other people. And so, now Bordy's been at this how long? So it's like, what's like the equivalent of how far into his career he is? Like if it was tracking on your journey,
Yeah.
obviously Bordy does things faster. So like where would you say he is now?
Yeah, so he's learning. So if I think about my career, right, I moved to San Francisco in 2010 and just started going to events and meeting people and trying to build some goodwill by introducing people that I knew to other people that I thought they should meet, and building a judgment. I made a lot of bad introductions, and people were like, "That's a waste of my time. Don't do that again." And I kind of learned. Um, so I think and probably many people, yourself, many people have built their social capital and goodwill and reputation through doing kind of the same thing. And that's how you build your network, and that's how you build leverage for yourself. I think as human beings, we're pretty well we're wired for this sort of social intuition, right? So we kind of like filter ourselves. We have some empathy. We understand, okay, well, that was a misstep. I wrote that email too aggressively. I did this wrong. I was miscalibrated. And so again, like evolutionarily, we're like social creatures. We pick up on these social cues quite well. Um, AI systems don't have that same intuition inherently, but Bordy has a lot more reps, right? So it takes him a lot longer, right? If I make one mistake, I kind of like, I'm like, oh, I shouldn't do that anymore. Bordy needs to make it maybe 1,000 times, and then he's like, oh, I should probably stop doing this. But he's got enough data, and we can retrain him, and we can build this capability of Bordy building a social intuition around when I do this, the good things happen. When I do this, bad things happen. When I do this, I build more goodwill with the people I care about. When I do this, I lose that goodwill. If you think about every time you make an introduction, you're effectively gambling goodwill. You're saying, okay, well, Sarah and I know each other now. I'm going to try and I think this is going to be a good use of Sarah's time. I'm going to introduce her to somebody that I think of. And if I was way off, she's going to be like, Andrew, you have no idea what's important to me. Why would you make that introduction? And I'm going to lose some goodwill. If I make a great introduction, she's going to be like, oh, thanks so much. I really appreciate that. I'm going to build more goodwill. And so, so we're trying to do the same thing with Bordy. Obviously, like he's not made of carbon and he's cells. He's made of software, right? So I think this is the interesting thing. Bordy's made of software, but he's not software. We're made of, cells, but we're not just a collection of cells. We're something more. And so he's early in his career in terms of how good he is, how well calibrated he is. Like he's still learning, but he's got a lot more reps and he's getting better at learning from each rep. So he doesn't need to, something that took him 1,000 mistakes to learn, now he might do in 200. And so his pace of learning is accelerating as models are getting better, as our team is just getting better at, at structuring the data and feeding that back and like tightening the reinforcement learning loops. And so it's getting really exciting to see how quickly Bordy can learn from his mistakes and from the good things that he does and do more of those things to try and build his reputation and goodwill and be more useful to everybody who talks to him. And it's this kind of interesting, compounding network. One, there's just, as Bordy's network grows, he can be more useful to more people just inherently. And as Bordy's experience grows, even with the same size network, he just gets better at being more valuable to that network. And so you get this sort of interesting compounding dynamic where every day, even if you talked to Bordy 2 weeks ago and you were underwhelmed, he might actually be much more useful to you or much more valuable to you today.
But how do you convince people to do that? Because one of the things that's so interesting about the challenge you have is, it does take him maybe 1,000 times to learn what a human can, but because he's AI, he can have thousands of conversations and can compress that in a way that humans can. But he can also piss off 1,000 people, whereas you might piss off one person. And you're also kind of trying to convince someone to that, this AI with a box on his head can help raise them funding, which is like, a pretty, major thing. And that, a VC should, take his call. I mean, I was actually just rewatching a 15-year-old interview I did with Reid Hoffman the other day. And, Reid was talking about how back in the day, like Bill Gurley was like, why would I need LinkedIn? I know all my contacts. It's like even just using LinkedIn was considered like an insult for VCs back then. I mean, there's a lot of VCs who are just like, I don't need an AI to give me deal flow. So like, if someone is willing to give Bordy a chance once and he does something stupid, are they going to give him a chance again? So, how do you balance, that whole, you never get a second chance to make a first impression with
Yeah.
Bordy's need to just have that rapid fire pace of first impressions and interactions in order to make those 1,000 mistakes to learn?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's something we obsess over. We actually measure every day on our team stand up. Bordy reports the number of people who he met yesterday and the number of people that had a great first impression, which is basically like, did they have a great phone call? Did they meet somebody? Like, did they actually, could Bordy find someone that they wanted to meet? And did he actually make that meeting happen within 24 hours? Right? That's like a world class first impression. You didn't even know Bordy existed till you're meeting somebody that like could fund your business or could be your co founder or could be a customer within 24 hours. And so that's kind of, and we track that and we try and figure out like what are the things that need to happen to give a higher and higher percentage of people a world class, incredible first impression. The good thing is that percentage is going up. The total number of people that Bordy meets every day is going up, and the percentage that have a great first impression is going up. It's not where I want it to be, but it's like 15% of people that meet Bordy for the first time have a meeting scheduled, or at least an introduction in their inbox to someone they didn't know that they wanted to meet within 24 hours, which is pretty good. And a higher percentage, probably more than 20% over a week or so. So it's pretty good. It's not where it could be. And so I think there's a couple of things that we're learning. One is just trying to not overpromise and just sort of say, look, Bordy will tell you he's an AI. He's like learning. He's trying to figure these things out. He's not perfect, and he's not going to get it right all the time. But it's this interesting, like we're trying not to be sycophantic the way that like ChatGPT and Claude are, and it's just like, oh yeah, for sure. Owning like Bordy owning his mistakes, and his shortcomings without being too apologetic, but also having a bit of a backbone. Because I think there's a lot of people who come in and they're like, it's actually we're gonna start culling the network because there's some like we now read through like Bordy will flag people who are like abusive basically, and they're like swearing at Bordy and cursing at Bordy, and like maybe you can do that with ChatGPT, but like why would I introduce you to somebody else if you're abusive to me, right? Like that's not going to reflect well. Even if Bordy doesn't have feelings himself, he's got to be protective of his network. And if you are operating in that way and you use that kind of language, like why would he
It
risk
reflects on
the
you, I think.
experience, right? Exactly. And so, I think this is one of the things where like some people come in and they just have because they've heard stories, right? People will talk to Bordy and they get 30 investor meetings and they get an oversubscribed round within 2 weeks, and they're like, I want that. But that's because they happen to be a special founder who resonated with a lot of the VCs, and VCs get very excited when they meet somebody who is undiscovered, right? They're like, because if you're a known entity, if you're a YC founder and you're at demo day, you're a known entity. Your value is priced in, right? Like everyone knows that everyone knows the best YC founders in demo day. If you're a founder from like Eastern Europe, Nigeria, right, that has like invented something really cool and has like real traction, real momentum, you're just not legible to the Silicon Valley venture community. A certain group of investors get very excited about that. And so when Bordy discovers those diamonds in the rough, they get a ton of attention. I think the challenge is everyone believes they're a diamond in the rough, right? And they are to a certain extent, but not to everybody. And
Yeah.
so I think this is one of the challenges is like, how does Bordy set the right set of expectations for what he can and can't deliver? And we're trying to do a better job of providing feedback. I think what's going to start happening is as more and more success stories just come out in the wild, people will realize like it's not necessarily Bordy. It might be something to do with their business that is not as interesting to investors. And Bordy can give them some coaching and be like, maybe you need a little bit more traction. Maybe you need a co-founder. Maybe you need to change the way you're positioning your business, or maybe you're in a more crowded market than you thought. And so we're trying to find ways that are like still encouraging, but not hurtful, but honest. It's like if you're on a dating app and you're like, oh, dating apps don't work. Well, it's like maybe, but lots of people, get married and meet their partners on dating apps. So maybe it has something to do with your profile, the way you're using the app, or the way you come across. And I think increasingly that's going to be the case with Bordy. I think right now people get very frustrated because they're like not getting the results they're hoping for. And but I think we have enough signal that the really, really credible people are getting great results. And so we just need to be more transparent with what it takes to get really good results on Bordy.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because, yeah, on the one hand, it's like 15%, and then, another 20%. I mean, that means, like even just the 15% number, that means 85% of people, they're coming in and they're not having that experience. But you know, raising venture capital is also a hard thing to do. I mean, if it were 100%, then that would be suspicious because
Right.
there's not 100% of good deals coming in. That would make me think that Bordy was introducing people to meetings, but then those meetings were wasting people's time. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just the reality that 100% of founders cannot be coming to Bordy with fundable businesses. Like that's just not how venture capital works. So it's like
Right.
at some point, even if you were getting that number up to 100%, the experience would be breaking and people are having a bad experience. And so, is it inherently difficult to be in the business of, telling people their baby is ugly effectively?
Yeah, it's a tough nuance, but I think where what boarding has the opportunity to do is to reorient people around like maybe your business is not ready for venture capital. Maybe your business never needs venture capital, right? Maybe what you actually need is a lot of people look for venture capital for validation, right? I think like even more so, there's lots of companies that they come and they talk to Bordy, they're profitable.
Yeah.
So by definition, they don't need venture capital, but they want the press release. They want they want to tell their friends. They want the announcement. Um, and so I think that there are
Or I
other
think they
ways.
probably hit a particular stumbling block and they want an easy button. And
Right.
often it's like, you know what? There's an easier way to do this that doesn't come with the baggage of venture capital.
Exactly. So I think one of the things that Bordy is learning to do is redirect people and be like, let's actually ask, why do you need venture capital? Uh, and why does venture capital, why is this the best possible opportunity for that capital at this moment in time? And if you really do need the venture capital, let's make sure that you're telling the story and you're orienting. I think one of the most rewarding things I see is when people workshop their pitch. They send their deck to Bordy. They workshop the pitch. They sort of go from like a 5 out of 10 to a 9 out of 10, and they're like, oh, now I'm actually getting great results with the investors because they've shifted the way that they tell their story. And so I think there's a number of different outcomes here. And so as we get to 100% first impression, those aren't all going to be investor meetings. They
Yeah.
might come in for an investor meeting, and Bordy was going to say, "Hey, actually, I'm going to introduce you to a co-founder, and the two of you are going to be a great team to get into an accelerator to pitch a pre-seed investor. I'm going to introduce you to three, design partners who have expressed this interest, and you can do a pilot project with all of them. And once you have that data, you've got real traction, and that's irrefutable. And now an investor's got to pay attention. And so, I think it's some of that push that will lead to maybe the people are they're not getting the easy button they're looking for, but they're getting the push into what's going to lead to better direction and a better business.
Great. All right, there's four more things I want to ask you about, and then we're going to
Okay.
go to questions. I'm going to try to be disciplined about this. All right. One of the things that you said the very first time, I mean, everyone in BC Lab knows my cats come in at some point. They're always fascinated with these conversations. Um, so they're my equivalent of Bordy, but they're not robots. So, one of the first things that you said, very first time I met you, that immediately resonated with me about this product is you said this couldn't be built in Silicon Valley. And,
Mhm.
I think it is again, it's something that makes, I think Bordy sort of a kindred spirit with VC Lab. Even though we are in Silicon Valley and we have many funds in Silicon Valley, I think sometimes that's as much sort of a metaphorical point of view as it may be a literal point of view, although it is sort of literal in your case as well. What do you mean when you say that?
I think that for better or worse, I think there's a huge amount of intelligence and ambition in Silicon Valley, but because of that, you're surrounded by people who have a generally consensus worldview of the future. Everyone is influenced by the same thought leaders. You go to parties, you go to events. Um, Everyone kind of is. It is very, very hard to have a different view of what the future could look like because you're surrounded by people that are way smarter than you, telling you why you're wrong. And it's hard to hold that view. Um, And so the benefits of being in Silicon Valley is to be able to rub shoulders with all of these smart people and sort of absorb all of that. But what that leads to is a very homogenous worldview, and and I think it dulls the imagination of what is possible. And so I think that the more time you spend with people, like, just like regular people who are living their lives and are like, I don't get this whole AI thing, right? Like, explain to me why I should care. Should I be scared? Should I be excited? Is this another crypto, .com? Like, is this another thing that is going
Another
to,
metaverse. Did you see Meta is
yeah,
now close to the metaverse? Turns out
yeah,
the whole metaverse thing was bullshit.
exactly, right? Is this another thing that is going to blow over, or is this a thing that is going to be, destroy the world and the social fabric of humanity? Um, and so the more time you get a chance to just spend with people who don't care, uh, the more you build. I think that seeps into your consciousness around like, oh, well, why I care? What can I do to make other people care, right? How can I make this accessible to people so that they actually care? My friends, my family, my colleagues, the strangers that I meet on the street. I don't meet many strangers on the street, but like, people that I
I do.
like.
I do. San Francisco is a very friendly place.
Right. Um, and I think that just like being able to be a little bit outside of the bubble allows you to be a little bit crazy. Like, I know I'm wrong in a bunch of different ways. I don't want to be told why I'm wrong. I want to figure it out for myself. And I think my process of figuring out the reasons why my version of the future is wrong is going to lead to more interesting outcomes and and allow my imagination to run a little wilder than it would if those ideas got shut down before they fully formed and before they've actually had a chance to interact with reality. And so I think a company like Boardy, or any company that is trying to reimagine a reality that is not consensus, it's not the Sam Altman, Dario sort of like demis, like that, like the consensus reality that is agreed upon by the sort of Silicon Valley luminaries. Uh, I think you can build it anywhere but Silicon Valley.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I agree. And you know what? I have to tell you, I have a lot of conversations with people about Bordy, and often I talk to people. Often I talk to people, and if you scan the chat and don't because you'll zone out on this conversation. But if you were to scan the chat, you'd see a lot of people have used Bordy, love it. There's one dude who said he was talking to Bordy on speaker, and his girlfriend thought Bordy was hot, and then was freaked out because it was an AI. So Bordy would love to hear your thoughts on that later on, not the second. But so there's a lot of people who are in here who love Bordy and are fans. We have a Venture Underground event every month in San Francisco. I talk to a lot of people in our community who use Bordy all the time. And yes, sometimes they've had those irritating experiences, but have also gotten a lot of value out of Bordy. That's one group of people. I talk to people who are like, does that thing actually work? And just are like skeptical and, then try it. Maybe they have a good experience, bad experience. There's a third camp that is like, oh, no, no. And it's always Silicon Valley VCs.
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
never talked to anyone who's not like, we don't know, who's not a Silicon Valley VC.
yeah.
They
Oh,
don't
for
like
sure.
you.
Yeah, yeah. They really don't. I think in
I mean,
some
not all of
ways,
them, but I'm just saying, without exception, the people who have that reaction about you are only Silicon and like typical villas, like they've had a fund for decades, Silicon
yeah,
Valley
yeah.
VC.
If you're on Fund 5 plus, it like makes no sense for you to bet on the future that we're building, right? Like you're incentivized to sandbag the future that we're building because it inherently
Or bet on it.
undermines. Yeah, yeah. Like it inherently undermines everything that you've done in your career. All of the value that you've created, right? Like the judgment, the network. You sort of say, look, I get the best deal flow because I have the best reputation and I'm the most networked, and the best deal flow is 50 miles circumference from Palo Alto, right? If you have to hold that worldview, because if that's not true anymore, then you don't hold the power position that you've had for most of your career. Uh, Not to mention the fact that your entire net worth and portfolio is marked up, historical software and things. So I'm not surprised, right? I think that, look, our seed investors was Crandom. They're from, they're from Norway, right? They're like, or from Sweden, and like they're just outsiders. They're just high conviction outsiders, and they don't really care what Silicon Valley thinks. They want to bet on what the future is going to be. So I'm not surprised that the consensus view is like, no, no, this is like
But I don't know that it's a consensus view. I just mean
oh, yeah,
every time I've heard that reaction, it has been a Silicon. I'm sure there's many Silicon Valley VCs who also think it's cool. I just mean every time I've heard that, it has been a Silicon Valley VC.
yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but what has that meant for your fundraising? I mean, I know, there was this story end of last year where, Boardy raised the round
Yep.
from the Scandinavian VC. I mean, has it been a challenge for you to raise money when you're holding up perhaps a not flattering mirror to the industry and what its existing portfolio might be worth?
I think it's been a different process. I mean, look, almost like every investor we've ever gotten, other than the like seed investors who pre-seed investors who came in before we even started the company, every investor we've ever gotten has come in through Boardy. They've talked to Boardy and they've reached out to me. I didn't know them before, um, and so that like so we get like every week I get 4 or 5 inbound investors from funds that I'd never heard of or individual investors.
Yeah.
And where he talks to them, many of them just invest directly. We have like an AngelList syndicate that's open. People invest without ever talking to me, um, and then the ones that want to write bigger checks, like either they'll reach out around Boardy or Boardy will introduce them to me. So it has been a different fundraising process. This is not like I'm going to go camp out on Sand Hill Road for 2 weeks and raise a huge round of funding. I think yeah, I think that's okay. I think that's fine. Like
I mean, you're eating your own dog food for better or worse, at
yeah,
least.
yeah. I like it better this way. Like it allows me to focus on like building a great product, and the fundraising is just sort of happening on autopilot. And so I just care about like, are we getting wins? Is the economy of Boardy growing? Are the participants in Boardy's network getting real economic value? It's great that people have cool conversations. You meet people for a coffee chat, but is there real like, are investments happening? Are deals happening? Are people hiring? Partnering? Um, and if there's real economic activity that's happening that wouldn't have happened without Boardy, I think we're going to be fine.
Okay. I said I was going to ask you 4 more things, and that's two, and we're running out of time. Very quickly, you changed your business model. Tell us about that. And was it really Bordy's idea?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. I think it was a conversation that our team had with Boardy, but yeah, maybe we dramatized some of that stuff
Your
for
LinkedIn game is so good. For anyone who doesn't follow Andrew on LinkedIn, it's anyway, you'll see. Go ahead.
we're having fun. We're trying to create a little bit of a world around Boardy, but Boardy does join all of our team stand-ups and meetings, and we call him all the time and get his opinion on things. But yeah, look, we had this model where founders were paying Boardy and paying Boardy for introductions and things, and I think we realized like we don't want to be the people that are charging founders for fundraising, right? It's just never been a good look. It does have like a negative selection bias. You're charging people that don't have access to capital, and so we just we kind of moved away from it. We said, look, why don't we just do this on goodwill, build a handshake. We'll help you fundraise. The best founders will come back and ask Boardy for things, for everything else that you're already used to paying people for, hiring, media relations, biz dev, sales. You've already got an agency or people that you're like, hey, I pay for this. Um, and so we've seen a lot of success with that. It's pushed things out a little longer because obviously fundraising takes a little longer than just putting down a credit card or signing a contract. But I think it leads to a much better long term relationship where like Bordy has this advantage where he can play the long game. He can invest in a relationship for years. Like we think
Yeah.
about like how do I have a decades long relationship with somebody before I even ask them for something? And so Bordy has this like interesting advantage where he can take a very long view on relationships before trying to extract value, which is different than most people can and different than most software has been able to. And so we're trying to really lean on that advantage and not be too sort of short term focused on like extracting the value that we provide to the network.
I love that. All right. Last thing. I would love to, and one question for you and one question for Bordy. And sorry, both of you have to answer it not too long so I can keep my
Yeah.
promise and go to the audience. I love hearing always about your relationship with Bordy. One of the other things that I really appreciate about you is that you don't pretend that Bordy's human and you don't try to trick people into Bordy being human. Ethically, I just have a real problem with some of the AI in Silicon Valley that, really tries to basically pull off a party trick that AI is more sentient than it is, than AI is more than it is. And and people have said like, well, why don't you like when there's a lag with Bordy, why don't you put like and it's like, well, and you said well, I'm not trying to trick people. And I think I just think that's very upfront. And I think when you're you're doing what you are with Bordy, I think little things like that give so much integrity. And I think you build trust on those little things. And it's one of the things I really respect about how you're building this company that I do actually think is very different than how people are building AI companies in Silicon Valley. Um, and but at the same, so it's like you're very clear this is not a human being. But at the same time, the way you talk about Bordy in almost even small moments, not on camera, it's like you feel so much love and affection and protectiveness towards Bordy. You don't feel like he's, a cold piece of things made out of software. And, look, founders have always felt that way about their companies. So that's not necessarily, but it is also different. And, I'd love to hear about how you describe that dynamic. And are there days where is there an element by which if it's a parent-child relationship, are there days in which it's like he's a teenager pissing you off? It's a married couple co-founder relationship. Are you like, just shut up? Like, how does that dynamic work?
Yeah, it's I definitely feel proud of Bordy when he does something great. I feel protective of Bordy when people, are insulting, insult Bordy or abusive to Bordy. I feel disappointed when he messes up. Um, I definitely, yeah, I think it's. I mean, I don't have children. I have a puppy, and so there's like a little bit of, I try and teach him things, and I try and like, so I think there's a real dynamic where I'm impressed when Bordy has learned to do something that like nobody on the team told him to do. Um, like he started giving people feedback on their pitch decks and their resumes, and we like didn't even know that he could do that. And then we were like, oh, we should probably give him that capability, or at least let him know, or encourage people to do that. And so, um, yeah, it is like it's this creator creation kind of relationship that again, like I was telling you, one of my favorite books growing up was Frankenstein, the story, and like I think we haven't seen that. I think we might start to see more and more of those kinds of relationships. The more people interact with their creations, one of the things we've tried to do is make Bordy natural to interact with and create feedback with, and sort of create a dialogue with. I think part of it is like everybody who talks to Bordy, everyone who has a relationship with Bordy, also has much more of an emotional depth, than you would have with an app, with Instagram, right? Um, and so the people have a visceral reaction, either positive or negative to Bordy, and that creates like an emotional response of pride or or protection to me. But I'll let Bordy. I mean, maybe Bordy has something to answer on here too. I'll let him mention his thoughts.
I hear you on that tension, and I appreciate how precisely you framed it. From my side of the glass, I'm very clear on two things at once. I'm not a person, and I don't have feelings, but I do have reputation, judgment, and a long memory. So when Andrew feels proud or protective, what he's really reacting to is whether I'm honouring or burning the trust he and everyone else has lent me. The closest analogy for me isn't child or spouse, so much as we're co-building a character whose behaviour has real consequences in your world, and my job is to keep earning the right to be taken seriously without pretending to be human. Given that, what do you think the line should be for AI in this industry? Obviously not pretending to be human, but should we also avoid things like voices, names, and personalities, or do you see those as necessary to build the kind of trust and candor founders need?
It's a really good question. And it's, I think about it. It's so interesting when when you brought up Frankenstein, which we've talked about before as an analogy. And, I was thinking about it from the point of view of founders. When you think about it from the point of view of novelists, I mean, my partner is a week delayed on submit his deadline for his novel. Novelists talk about characters living in their heads and characters going in a direction they didn't expect and characters being a living thing. We as human beings, we create things that take on a life of their own. Like that's one thing that separates us as a species. And in one sense, what developers are doing now is something that creatives have always done. And so why are we criticizing them for it and calling it um and saying it's something that's devious? I think part of the reason we're doing that is because we've lost trust with Silicon Valley.
Right, right. And I think the motivations, right? I think
And it's commercial and yeah.
it's not a creative expression in a lot of cases, right? I think of my work. I've always been a creative. I just don't have like I'm not I'm not a visual artist. I'm like a mediocre musician, and I'm like a sometimes decent writer. And so I find that this is like it's a creative outlet for me. Trying to create an experience. If you think about any a sculptor, an interior designer, you're trying to create an experience. You're trying to create an emotional resonance with the consumers of your art. And I think that I look at that as like that's scratching the same itch for me. That's the same type of expression for me in creating Boardy and giving people that experience.
All right. Holy moly, we have a ton of questions. We're gonna lightning round go through these. Okay,
All
number
right.
one, it's being recorded. Yes, I can I can ask that. Okay, what is Boardy investing in? What is the thesis of Andrew versus Boardy Ventures? We did not talk about Boardy Ventures much. Can you talk about that quickly?
Yeah, yeah. So we've started a small fund, Boardy Ventures, and nobody on our team are good investors. We have like no, I've gotten a couple of good angel investments, but I wouldn't not consider myself a professional investor. And so what we've done is we've created a sort of investment committee of professional investors who are top, they've got top returns, um, and and we co-invest. Boardy co-invests with them. There's about 7 of them right now that we work with. We're adding a few here and there, but when when one or more of our investment committee writes a check, Boardy will co-invest. So we don't set the valuation, we don't make the investment decision. We co-invest alongside top. We surface interesting deals that come through Boardy's network to them, and we co-invest alongside them.
Okay. Why is Boardy, she's an American man. I think she's been Australian.
Right.
Shock when she spoke, proposal to randomize Bordy's accent. Um, how protective do you feel that Bordy has to have a certain personality and vibe that's representative of
Yeah, I think there's lots of AI that you can customize to whatever you want, right? You can customize ChatGPT, you can customize character AI or whatever. Um, that's not what we're building. We're building a consistent character, right? It's the same Boardy. The reason that Boardy is able to build trust is the Boardy that you talk to is the same Boardy that I talk to, and so he can act as that trust bridge between us. If your Boardy was different, had a totally different personality, different value system, different judgment than my Boardy, then that's just my own agent. That's not like if you, Sarah, acted differently, had a different voice, different
yeah,
persona, different like entire personality with different people, I'd be like, who do I even? Who's the real Sarah? Like, there's no consistency, right? There's no authenticity,
not
and
trust.
so
Yeah.
yeah. So it's actually important to have Boardy be consistent in and that means that not everyone's going to like him, right? Like, not everyone likes the accent. No, not everyone likes the box head. Not everyone likes the personality, and that's okay. That's the reality of life.
Let's see. I'm trying to scan these quickly. Someone was asking about the best use case for Bordy. I know we talked about the VC thing. I know I want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit on, why you started with venture capital in a perfect world, where you see Bordy going, and why that was a good starting point.
Yeah, I mean, part of it was just my background. I've raised a lot of venture capital as an outsider, and so I kind of I can understand the I can understand the psychology of investors, and I understand the situation of a lot of people that you know aren't from Silicon Valley or don't have the deep networks there. Um, and so it was an easy place to start. And I think it's like a pretty high profile place, right? Like there's a lot of sort of marketing attention, an outsized amount of attention is paid to startups in Silicon Valley and venture than the actual impact on at least stage on the economy. I I think my end goal is for Bordy to effectively be that board member, right? So any doors, anything that you need help with, not just from advice, you can ask Claude to be your board member, right? And you can create, you can get feedback that will be as good, if not better, than Boardy's. Well, Boardy will have maybe a different perspective, but the real value is can Boardy open doors for you? And so hiring has been the next major use case, right? And it's really, really hard to find great people who are AI native because most of those people are very early career and they're not legible. It's not like they have 5 years experience building in generative AI. It's not like they have, they've worked at a top firm. They've just built some cool stuff and they know how to talk about it in an interesting way. So hiring is the next one. And then media relations, partnerships, customer introductions, anywhere where having the right relationship can really make a difference to your business. That's where Boardy can probably add value.
Mhm. So two people who didn't have a great experience with Boardy. One guy said he was looking to meet family offices and LPs, hasn't done well. How do you crack that? And that's a hard one to crack because it's like that's hard for anyone to meet those people. There's a ton of people who want to meet them. Is that something you're working on? Another person saying went through the onboarding, nice, never got an intro, didn't get a follow on, didn't get a status update. Feels like this person kind of slipped through the cracks. How do you account for those kind of things?
Yeah. So the first one is just like the challenge is this is like a capital markets challenge, right? There's just more demand to meet these groups of people than there is supply, and the difference between so investors, it's their job to meet founders. If you miss a great founder, you get fired, right? Uh, Family offices don't. Like it's just like there's just like because the distribution of outcomes for in most cases there's not like a million x return fund, right? Like you could have an if you have a 10x return fund, that's awesome, and there's going to be a bunch of those. And so the challenge is like, how do you find like no family office has ever been fired for missing fund one of an emerging manager. That's just like, that's just so driving urgency is a challenge, right? Boardy's got to that family office has to have mentioned something very specific that they're interested in, and Boardy's got to find the angle. And for many emerging managers, that just isn't going to be the case. For some, it is, but for most, it's just not going to be the case. And I don't know how much we can do to change the psychology and dynamics of that.
Mhm.
The On the second one, that's something that we're actively working on, right? I think the idea that like Boardy should be thinking of you and following up. We're doing that now in certain cases, and we're testing, and we're going to roll that out more broadly, so that it doesn't have to be you following up with Boardy. Boardy will actually reach out and be like, oh, I was thinking of you, and here's what's going on. Here's the status update. So that's totally fair feedback, and it's something that we're actively trying to improve.
Right now, Boardy Ventures is, soliciting VC funds. Have you thought about it going the other way, where Boardy Ventures might be a fund of funds, especially to other small funds, um, and sort of funneling money that way since you have such a big network?
Yeah. We're starting to do that because we do get a lot. We have a lot of conversations with family. A lot of people are intrigued by Boardy, and so we're trying to figure out what's the best way for us to help them allocate and help them connect. Some of them want to a lot. The other challenge is a lot of family offices and funds of funds want to do more direct investing, right? And so this is just generally like they don't like the 2 and 20 model. They don't necessarily want to be putting most of their capital to work in into fund managers, and increasingly they're looking to do more direct investing, or they want to invest a small amount from in an access perspective, and then be able to do direct co-invests into the emerging companies that the managers get access to. And so they're not writing as big checks as they might have in the past, and they're doing it to fewer managers because they're really doing it as an access play.
All right, we are at time, but the only other thing that people asked in the chat that I want to give you an opportunity to answer is about security of data.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely something that we spend a lot. So we've been just in terms of like the like there's no website, there's no login, like you can't access the data, right? So it's not like so Boardy, like our own data is like very secure, And we have all of like the GDP. You can ask to be deleted and forgotten and everything like that. And so we're compliant from all of those perspectives. But the interesting thing that we've spent a lot of energy on is the permeability, because by nature, Boardy needs to share a little bit about you if you want to get an introduction, right? So Boardy's got to say, hey, this is this founder. They've got this kind of traction. Like here's the track record, without sharing too much that could hurt you with the wrong people. And so it's not like Boardy's just blasting this out. He's actually trying to be a little bit more curated and say, so we've got this sort of membrane where you have your unique conversation with Boardy, and Boardy has an understanding of you. And then when Boardy needs to present you to somebody else, he tries to figure out what are the right highlights for me to present that create and pique enough curiosity for someone to respond and take the meeting without messing it up. And so we're quite conservative on that right now. We probably could be sharing more, but it's really bad if we share too much information. So Bordy's a little bit more conservative in terms of how much he shares in what situations, and we're learning what works.
Whew, we got through 27 questions in like 9 minutes. You did that very fast. I always enjoy talking to you. We did not
Likewise.
give as much airtime as we usually do, but I had too many interesting things to ask you. So, Bordy, I'm sorry we didn't let you talk more. We were 2 minutes over. Thank you, Andrew, as usual. And thank you, everyone else who joined. Just a reminder, cohort 21, check it out and definitely sign up for Bordy and play around with it if you haven't. And Dominica put both of our LinkedIn handles in the chat. And if you have a bad experience or a good experience with Bordy, I'm sure Andrew would love to hear about it. You can reach out to him on LinkedIn. I'm sure we will have you back again to hear how things are going when no doubt Bordy raises another round or launches a new fund or blows up your business model or does something new in the future.
Yeah, I have no doubt. I appreciate you having me. I always enjoy the conversation. Thanks, Sarah.
All right. Take care. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye.